Let's keep reading. So this means, this idea that the national Israel or ethnic Israel that we read about in the Tanakh is where we get our foundational understanding of the eklektoi, the original elect, the people of God. This means that this means the concept of elect now refers to the spiritual family of God, composed of both believing Jews and believing Gentiles, all united in Messiah. So I'm really big on remnant theology. What that means is I'm really big on explaining that Gentiles do not overtake Israel. The Gentiles, this is Romans chapter 11 that I'm working from. Gentiles, are selected from a wild olive tree and grafted into a cultivated olive tree. They go from being a wild olive to being a cultivated. And in Paul's analogy, this tree that he's describing, you could think of it as one of two different things. You could either think of it as the family of Israel, right? National Israel itself is that tree, of which inside the tree there are those Jewish people, those Israelites who've embraced Yeshua as their Messiah. This would make them remnant Israelites. And the branches that they occupy are where the grafted in wild olive branches join. So they join national Israel at the remnant level. They take their place on the tree, the Gentiles, take their place on the tree next to the remnant Jews so that they both recognize Jesus. That's one way to describe the tree. I've heard other teachers describe the tree as the family of Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being the tree itself with the roots down into the rich soil of faith in God, genuine faith in God, and thus that is the tree that Gentiles are grafted into. And this would also fit with Paul's teachings earlier on in the book of Romans, as well as later on in Galatians, or I should say put them as reverse, right, since Galatians came first. Galatians chapter 3 and Romans chapter 4 are what I'm talking about, where Paul goes to great pains to explain to Gentiles that they are part of Abraham's offspring. Understand? They've been joined to Papa Abraham's family, and that's the same theology that's being described by the olive tree and the same theology that's picked up in the book of Ephesians, where he talks about Gentiles in faith being joined to the commonwealth of Israel. Those who are far off, meaning the Gentiles, have now been brought near to those who were already near, namely those in Israel who had the oracles of God and the promises of God and the covenants of God spelled out to them, but more specifically joined to remnant Israel, meaning those who exercise faith in Messiah. I've got whole videos on what I'm talking about that are available on my website. Go to tetzetorah.com and look through my Shomer Mitzvot series. There's links at the very top of my website. Just click on the Shomer Mitzvot and just look for the videos or look for the teachings on all, either maybe grafted into Israel or something like that. Let's keep going in this particular study. So consider these New Testament uses of eklektos that clearly refer to this unified body of believers. This is really important in terms of rapture. And remember, we're still working from this question, who is the elect in Matthew's, Mark, and Luke's Olivet Discourse passages? Is it A, the unbelieving Jews who eventually believe in Jesus, but it's certainly not the church? That's what Pretribbers say. Is it B, the church per post-trib and Prewrath? Or is it C, and I'm saying C because in one way it's Israel, in another way it's the church, but we have to understand that there are still also different paths that the church and Israel have to embark on when the rubber meets the road, when there are some really tough times that are going to come down. Some things are going to be shared by the church in Israel at that time. Some things are going to be differentiated. So we can consider that as a maybe a choice C. But right now, let's look at these New Testament usages of eklektos. We're only picking on the New Testament. I could have gone deep into the Tanakh, but we're only picking on the Apostolic Scriptures because the Olivet Discourses are in the Apostolic Scriptures. So that's primarily where I'm going to go. So let's look at some of these. We've got Romans 8:33. Who will bring a charge against God's elect? This passage unequivocally refers to the church, the collective body of those who have placed their faith in Christ, demonstrating that the elect are those who are justified and loved by God, right? No one would argue with if you go back and read the passage and establish the context, you'll see that I'm right there. Picking up in Colossians, of course, these are both Paul's writings. Colossians 3:12, so as those who have been chosen of God, that phrase chosen of God is actually rooted in the Greek word that we're looking at right now, the eklektoi or eklektos or something like that. So as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, and I don't finish out the verse there. Here Paul addresses a congregation comprised of both Jewish and Gentile believers, applying the designation of chosen to them collectively. That's the whole point. It references, that's why I said, when I said a version C, when I said both of them, and yet there must be a recognition that some of those in national Israel, when the time heats up, when the tribulation happens, some of those people are instructed specifically by Yeshua to go flee. Some of the elect are told to get out of Jerusalem. But there's no such command that I can find in the Apostolic Scriptures where any writer, whether it be Yeshua or Paul or Peter or someone else writing on the end times, warns Christians worldwide to flee from wherever they are. Like those who are in New York City need to flee. Those who are in Salt Lake City need to flee. I don't find any verses that tell Christians to flee the intense persecution known as the Great Tribulation. And yet, Yeshua tells specifically those who are in Jerusalem, this is in Luke's rendering of the Olivet Discourse, and I think this ties directly into what took place in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple, more so first for the disciples than it's going to be later on in any later 70th week of Daniel scenario where there's going to be a siege of Jerusalem again. So we have a near-far prophecy, telescoping going on, prophetic telescoping. Get up and get out of Jerusalem, Jesus says. Who's he talking to? He's talking to the elect. But insomuch as only those who are in Jerusalem have the ability or need to get up and get out, that's who he's referring to. So I keep having to focus a bit on who is the elect and what is their responsibility to any given passage. All right. So Colossians has Paul bringing Jew and Gentile together under this word elect. Titus 1:1, for the faith of those chosen of God. Again, this refers to all who share the common faith in Jesus, regardless of their ethnic background. So I'm trying to carefully distinguish that in the Tanakh, we have verses that use the word elect in the Septuagint rendering of the Tanakh, obviously, the Greek version of the Bible that we call the Old Testament. We have this word elect that shows up, and in prophetic passages where we're describing tribulation type activity, in other words, we have the Tanakh prophesying about the coming time of God's wrath, Jacob's trouble, the day of the Lord activities, we then begin to realize that the intense persecution against God's elect must include people from Israelite background, Israelite heritage, ethnicity. How else would they understand those passages unless they think that this is a mystery passage pointing to the church, but not yet revealed in the time period of the Tanakh? I don't think that they would have known directly that it was the church that is being referred to. In other words, there's no need to strip those Old Testament references of the elect away from faithful Israelites and relocate that word only and exclusively to Christians living in the time period when the New Testament, quote unquote, is going to be enacted. Understand what I'm saying there? That would smack of replacement theology, but happening even before there was a Christian church. I mean, oy vey, right? Replacement theology on steroids. Is it enough that we Christians who feed into this replacement theology, supersessionism, take all of our cues from the apostolic scriptures? Is it enough that we misunderstand our New Testament Bible by supposing that there's a replacement theology, church has replaced Israel, that we can't have enough that we have to go also into the Tanakh and rob the Old Testament Jews of their identity as the elect also? Do we have does replacement theology have such a big appetite that it's got to go over to the Old Testament and also say, wow, look, there's some elect over here in the Old Testament. Let's gobble them up too and claim them for the church. Nah, they're not Israelites either. So this is really a wild notion, this replacement theology, this supersessionism, this idea that the church has replaced Israel. Let's just leave it the way it actually reads, that the elect in the Tanakh are faithful Israelites at a national level. Even they're just standard Israelites, right? The promises made to Abraham's family extends to those within his family clan, primarily at the ethnic level, at the family level, at the what I could call covenant level, but on a natural understanding. So natural covenant membership. This doesn't mean they're saved, but it does mean they're Israelites by virtue of identity with being identity with Abraham's as their father. So there's some natural aspect going on, some temporal connection with God and covenant membership. So temporal covenant membership, natural covenant membership, ethnic connection to Abraham as their papa, things like that. Blessings flow at some limited level is what I'm trying to refer to. That still counts for being elect, right? That's still elect at some level, although it's a limited level. And don't get me wrong, at the end of the day, when Jesus comes back and he claims his elect as his own, he's not just going to automatically scoop up anyone who's a Jew. Nope, not going to happen. Even though you have a covenant with God at a natural level, at a temporal level, that will not save you. You must have a relationship with God through his son Yeshua at the spiritual level, at the heavenly level, at the permanent level, at the lasting level. It's not enough. Let me use language from Galatians, and I'm being very firm on this point for a reason. It's not enough to be a member of earthly Jerusalem. You've got to have membership in heavenly Jerusalem. If you want to see the King of Kings, if you want to see God's face one day, you've got to be a citizen of the heavenly Jerusalem, the one who's from above. These are harsh words to national Israelites, to those who are part of fleshly, earthly, temporal Jerusalem, to hear these words. It's harsh, but I have to stick with it because it's truth, and it's what they need to hear from someone who's not afraid to tell them the truth. So, back to our study. We're talking about who is the elect in the Olivet Discourse. Based on what I can tell, what we've been reading so far, the Olivet Discourse and the gathering of the elect, let's keep going, based on what I can tell so far, of drawing my identity of the elect, starting with the Tanakh, and then moving into the apostolic scriptures and building onto that definition. Let's pick up this paragraph, this last one here. The Olivet Discourse and the gathering of the elect. When Jesus speaks in the Olivet Discourse, his use of the elect primarily refers to his followers, those who have accepted him as Messiah, both Jewish and Gentile. So again, going back to Matthew, I want to stay in the context, right? With all of our Tanakh undergirding us as our foundation, and with all the other places in the apostolic scriptures where we find the word elect, we still have to start with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because that's the discussion of this particular teaching tonight. So in Matthew 24:31, Yeshua declares, let's get a quote here, "And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other." That's out of the NESB. So, the gathering, the language of gathering the elect with a great trumpet from a global scope, from the four winds, strongly aligns with the descriptions of the rapture of the church found in 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17 and 1 Corinthians 15:52. These passages describe the resurrection of believers and they're being caught up to meet the Lord. Like I keep saying, national Israel is not rapture ready. She has not embraced Jesus. If the rapture were to take place right now, like the Pretribbers say it could, I don't follow that theology, but let's just pretend that they're right and I'm wrong. If the rapture were to take place right now, national Israel is going to be left behind because they're not embracing Jesus. Rabbinic Judaism rejects Jesus. And every Jewish person who has fallen victim to that lie is going to be left out of any rapture that the Bible describes. The rapture is for believers. The rapture is for those who have embraced Yeshua. It's not for those who have embraced God only. You understand the distinction I'm trying to make here? It's not enough to claim a faith in God. You must have a faith in Yeshua, which equates to a faith in God. If the faith in Yeshua is genuine, then it includes a genuine faith in God because of details regarding Trinity and things like that. But I don't want to go off into the side rabbit trail for a moment. I don't want to do that. Just know that when Yeshua's using the word elect here, he's speaking to the disciples. Remember, this was a discussion that was sparked by their question earlier on in the discourse. Tell us, they're looking at the temple being destroyed. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? It's kind of like three questions if you think about it. When will these things be? Yeshua was having a discussion about the temple stones being overturned. When will these things be? The destruction of the temple. Question number 2, what will be the sign of your coming? Question number 3, and of the end of the age. Maybe 2 signs there. One sign of the coming, one sign of the end of the age, unless you want to conflate them as to one sign that refers to both his coming and the end of the age. Could go either way. My point is, when he starts giving them all these details in the Olivet Discourses, he's referring to the disciples as representatives of the body that he's collecting together. The body of Messiah. He's not looking at them as national Israelites, as ethnic Jews who reject him. Because he says quite plainly, I think I just read it here. Nope, it's not there. He says quite plainly, go back and read it on your own, they will persecute you, they, the world, they, a wicked humanity, they, people who serve the Antichrist during that day, they will persecute you for my name's sake. For my name's sake? Who's he talking about? He's talking about Christians. He's talking about believers. He's talking about people of the church. So let's continue. Let's kind of wind this down. Let me see how much farther I can keep going. We have a passage reference the 1 Thessalonians passage. I want to read that for you. I quoted it. I also have the Corinthians passage just quoted in full. 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 to 17. This is for those people out there who still can't get it through their head that there's actually going to be a rapture. I get comments on these and emails probably once a week. It's amazing how many Christians are being taught that there isn't a rapture, that there isn't a gathering together. And usually one of the first things I do to push back is I ask them, I say, okay, so there's no rapture. Is there a resurrection? Now, why do I ask them that question? Let's keep reading, you'll find out. Paul writing, quote, this is the Thessalonian passage, for the Lord himself would descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Stop, full stop. Look at that period there after the word first. What event is he describing here? He's describing the resurrection. Yep. So I ask those people who push back and say there's no rapture, I ask them, is there a resurrection? Now, if they say no, then I say, may I shake your hand? Because you're the actual first Sadducee I've ever met in real life. The Sadducees were sad, you see, because they didn't believe in the resurrection. That's what I was taught in Sunday school, right? Why were the Sadducees called Sadducees? The Sadducees were sad, you see, because they didn't believe in the resurrection. Okay, I'm being kind of funny. But it is true. They didn't believe in the resurrection as far as I can recall from my Sunday school lessons. So when I hear people say there's not going to be a rapture, I have to remind them that in Thessalonians, so let's keep reading, Paul connects resurrection with rapture. Look at the very next sentences. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Who is he talking about? He's talking about those Christians who have survived the onslaught of Antichrist during the Great Tribulation. That Greek word behind the English word remain is a word that was often connoted to imply someone who survived a life or death ordeal, a survivor. We who are alive and survive, we could translate it that way, will be caught up. Not just those who are here, but survive. We'll be caught up together with who? With them. Who's the them? Those who got resurrected. And we're going to all meet together in the clouds. So, is there a rapture? Yes, there is, because there's a resurrection. And the rapture, in case you're not putting together why we need a rapture, the resurrection is for those who were dead. Hello, right? Those who are alive don't need a resurrection. That's for the people who are alive. We who are alive, that means living, right? We haven't died. But it is the group of living that joined the group who had died that all become this giant group that gets taken up with Yeshua. So is there a rapture? There has to be a rapture if there's a resurrection. And we know for certain that there is a resurrection. This goes all the way back to the Tanakh. Yes, there's a resurrection, so there must be a rapture as well. And they happen when? At the same time, as far as I can tell. In this, because Paul says, then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together. I have to go back and look at the Greek, but I think the then there is the Greek word tate, which means sequentially happening right after the next thing that whoever the writer's just talking about, if I'm correct. All right, 1 Corinthians 15:52, we have our famous seventh trumpet, last trumpet, passage. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, which, again, post-tribbers and mid-tribbers like to think that this is the seventh trumpet. Last trumpet, seventh trumpet, same thing. I disagree, but I won't follow my sword for it. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. But, again, it's not an issue it's not a hill I want to die on. So, could it be the seventh trumpet? It could be. I don't think it is, but that's for a different study. So, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound. Look at this, and the dead will be raised. Who are the dead? The dead are those that we just talked about in Thessalonians a moment ago, the dead in Christ. The dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. When Paul says the we will be changed there, he could be referring to the living, because at the moment that Paul wrote that letter, he was among the living, and he was writing to the living there in Corinth, right? We, the living in Messiah, meaning it matches up with the Thessalonian passage that those we who are alive and remain, we who are alive and remain, I could put that in brackets after the word we there, and we will be changed. Or you could just think of the we here as the collective body of Messiah that experiences this event at the time that it happens, and thus the we would also include the dead believers who will also be transformed because their corrupted bodies will be raised incorruptible or imperishable. Remember Paul in this Corinthians passage, earlier on in the passage, it's a big long discourse about how that dead, corrupted bodies that have died in Messiah must be changed into incorruptible, imperishable bodies. So, the major theme of the 1 Corinthians 15 is all about resurrection. In fact, he spends more time on resurrection there than he does on rapture. Yeah, go back and read it. So you cannot get away with, if you want to say there's no rapture, then you have to say there's no resurrection. And if you want to say there's no resurrection, then you need to take out a pair of scissors and cut out 1 Corinthians chapter 15 out of your Bible, because it's all about the resurrection there. Okay, let's see how far I can go. We're going to finish point number 1 tonight. Classic Prewrath proponents argue that this gathering of the elect in Matthew 24:31 is a clear reference to the rapture of the church. That's what I believe when I read the passage. Olivet Discourse is Jesus talking to the disciples. He's not talking to unbelieving Israelites when he's talking to the Jewish people, when he's talking to the disciples there. Even at the micro level, the disciples are not unbelievers. So why would we suddenly blow up the micro into the macro? Blow it up into the macro and apply it to national Israel. There's no logic behind that particular type of interpretation. It's just a desperate attempt, I think, for a rapture scenario that doesn't want to admit that the church has to suffer persecution at the hands of Antichrist, and a desperate attempt to keep the church out of the 70th week of Daniel, aka the 7-year tribulation period, so-called. I don't like that term, but I got to borrow it so you guys understand where I'm going. So we classic Prewrathers, we do believe that Matthew is referring to the reference of the church, Matthew 24:31, when it says he's going to gather his elect. And this encompasses all believing Jews and Gentiles who comprise the elect, right? National Israel, you're not rapture ready. You're not going to go when the time comes. You're going to miss it. The 144,000 first fruits, we could talk about, will they be raptured? Will they be left behind? I believe they'll be left here, but it's not because they don't believe in Jesus, or it could be that too. Their sealing doesn't have to be equated with the belief in Jesus at that moment. Some pre-authors say it does equal salvation. Some say it doesn't. In other words, if the 144,000 are truly recognized as believing in Jesus, why wouldn't they go at the time of the rapture? And so we'll have to discuss that when the time comes. There's some nuances that could go either way as far as I can tell. But for now, I can positively and confidently say that national Israel as a whole is not rapture ready. They're not going to go. Okay, so the elect spoken of in Matthew is Jew and Gentile in Messiah. It's not merely a future ingathering of only post-rapture converts or exclusively ethnic Jews, right? What do the Pretribbers call these Christians that go through the tribulation? They call them tribulation saints. They are distinct from the church in their view. They're distinct from the church in that the church got raptured prior to the 7th week of Daniel kicking off. So they got raptured at the very beginning of the 7 years, something like that. Let me go back to that chart. Nope, that's not the chart. The chart is there, right? Let's zoom in on the Prewrath, Pretribs. Their rapture is at the beginning of their 7-year time frame. And since they believe that whole 7 years is tribulation/wrath, right? That's why they call themselves pre-trib raptures. They don't call themselves pre-wrath rapture, right? As if God's wrath right here in the middle was the only thing that they're excused from. No, they believe they're excused from this time period, Great Tribulation, and this time period, Tribulation. They escape both of those. Thus, their name, Pretribulation rapture, right? So what do they do with someone who comes to Jesus, comes to faith in Christ after the rapture took place? Because when you read through the book of Revelation, there are people spoken about after chapter 4 as believing in Jesus, right? When you get to Revelation chapter 12, the devil goes after, Satan goes after the woman and those of her offspring who are described as keeping the commandments and have faith in Jesus. Well, this is way after chapter 4 of Revelation, a point in time in the book that Pretribbers think that the church got raptured when John was called up to heaven by the voice that sounded like a trumpet. They think that's the rapture. I don't think it's the rapture, but they do. So just play along with them for a moment. If it's true that that's the rapture, then who are these people that have faith in Jesus in Revelation chapter 12? They're not supposed to be there if they're the church. They can't be the church according to pre-tribs. So dispensationalistic pre-trib theology calls those people tribulation saints. Yeah, it gives them a new label. So back over to our essay, which we're going to finish tonight. I'm sorry, we're going to stop at point 1. So this elect here in the Olivet Discourse, is it unbelieving Israel? Is it the church? Is it the elect of God, which includes both Jew and Gentile? I say it's not merely a future ingathering of only post-rapture converts, in other words, tribulation saints, or exclusively ethnic Jews, but the culmination of God's plan to gather his unified people from all nations before the final outpouring of his wrath. The election remains rooted in Israel's calling, but its scope has expanded through Messiah to include all who believe. And that's where we'll stop tonight. We're going to pick this up next week with point number 2. Jesus' teaching in Matthew 24 was to the church founders, right? Meaning it's going to act as a kind of a summary or a kind of review of what we just looked at tonight. That's why we'll pick it up next week. It's actually quite short. But let's stop here. That'll do it for this particular study. Just a reminder before I close. Next week, let me pull up a calendar for you guys. Next week is May 31st, the very end of May. That day, or the day after, Sunday, June 1st, is Erev Shavuot, Erev Pentecost. Thus, many Messianic congregations will be gearing up for their Shavuot celebration. It would really be great if the church also celebrated its own quote-unquote birthday at Pentecost. A lot of Christian churches don't, though. It's a shame. Nevertheless, I'm not going to be meeting on the 31st, so no class on the 31st. It's because I want you to be able to be with your local congregation and meet with them there. So no class on the 31st. We'll pick up our class again on the 7th of June. So that's where we'll stop. But that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events.